Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Max Verstappen has responded to George Russell's claims that Red Bull were sandbagging at the Australian Grand Prix and suggests that there was some pace management going on for Verstappen and reckons there might have been another half a second per lap in the tank had he been required to use it. Also says though that he doesn't really expect the FIA to be able to do anything to curtail their present dominance. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. The goofiest story of the day comes from the Williams Formula 1 team. So their former sponsor Rocket has launched a $149 million legal action claim against the team that says when they were sponsoring the car previously, such as in 2019, that Williams had promised Rocket to provide a competitive car. Rocket are claiming that their brand image has been hurt by $150 million because Williams had a terrible car. Now, this is pretty entertaining to be honest. The team has dismissed the claim as being complete BS, but their boss says, I don't want to do this, but I think we have been wronged, because he reckons that Williams promised that they'd be competitive, as in Rocket would have a positive reputational effect from this, but sponsoring Williams can carry its downsides if the car is atrocious. Now, the issue is, right, did they say in the contract that our car would be P6 or better in the constructors, and then this contract is fine, if not it's void? Like, I don't think they did, right, let's be honest here. More than likely, Williams told them, yeah, we're pretty confident we're going to have a competitive car, but it was never written into the contract. So, you know, I don't really think Rocket have anything to go on. I haven't seen the contract, so I don't know, but I just think it's rather entertaining, right? The Rocket won 150 million, and Williams are like, okay, maybe we said in one of the meetings that we thought we were going to have a competitive car, maybe promise you were going to have a competitive car, but if it wasn't in the contract, then there's nothing that they can really do. Another big story of the day is coming out of Felipe Massa. So if you guys aren't familiar with Crashgate, I'll give you the quick rundown. Singapore 2008, Renault really wanted Alonso to win this race, so they requested and basically said, if you don't do this, you're going to get fired type thing, Nelson Piquet Jr. to deliberately crash in Singapore to bring out the safety car in perfect timing to give Alonso the advantage he needed to win the Grand Prix. Now, at the time, it was known among teams that there was something dodgy going on here, and it was confirmed in 2009. Nelson Piquet Jr. said, yeah, they asked me to crash deliberately, which gave Alonso the win. So this has been known as the Crashgate scandal for some time. Now, there was a recent development that came up where Bernie Ecclestone, who somehow is still going, mentions that they knew, Formula 1 knew, Ecclestone and Max Mosley knew in 2008 that this had happened, and it was a deliberate crash and therefore a huge scandal. But he said in a comment just a month or so ago, we decided not to do anything then. We wanted to protect the sport and save it from a huge scandal. That's why I used angelic tongues to persuade my former driver Nelson Piquet to keep calm for the time being. We had enough information at the time to investigate the matter. According to the statutes, we should have cancelled the race in Singapore. Basically said this race was, you know, all of the results were null and void because the safety car came out, Massa came into the pits, the Ferrari crew messed up his pit stop, he went away with the fuel pipe attached or something, absolute disaster class from Ferrari, and then he ended up finishing 13th, I believe, where Hamilton came third that Grand Prix, with Alonso ended up winning. So there's an argument to say, if that race had been cancelled, as Ecclestone says, that means it would not have counted for the title, and Massa would have become champion because Hamilton beat him by 1 point in the end, based on the results in Brazil. So, you know, pretty controversial stuff. Now, it must be said, this is a decade and a half ago now, and Ecclestone is probably only saying this just because he can, and just to stir a bit of I mean, I think the guy's 93, so he likes to stir the pot a bit. He's a questionable character for sure, but Felipe Massa has heard this and said, well, damn, they had the information to cancel the race that would have led to Massa being the champion that year, so can't they do it in retrospect? Massa goes on to say, pretty interesting, because Massa might have a claim to sue Formula 1 or Ecclestone for something or another, but to claim that they can overturn the result of the championship seems optimistic at best from my perspective. But Massa says, it is very sad to know that the result of this race should have been cancelled and I would have a title. In the end, I was the one who lost the most with this result, so we are going after it to understand all of this, saying I have no financial interest in the matter. Will I sue the FIA to earn money, but without changing the results? No. All I'm interested in is that justice corrects the situation. So, seems confident they'll overturn the result. I don't think that's going to happen personally. Fundamentally, you could say it was Ferrari's mistake with the whole pit stop mishap they had there anyway, but yeah, very interesting story to kick off the day nonetheless. Let's dive into this sandbagging drama then. So George Russell said in yesterday's video, we discussed it, that Red Bull are not showing their full potential. He reckons they're probably 7/10 of a second faster than the fastest cars in the rest of the field, which is probably still the Aston Martin, right now. Might change over time though. Red Bull did bring a new upgrade to this weekend, it seems. I believe they brought a couple of new things to their car, new front wing and stuff, so their car might have got slightly further ahead, and their competitors are trying to catch up as well. It wasn't the greatest weekend for Red Bull, but they still won relatively comfortably. And Russell says, look, they're holding pace back because they don't want to appear so good that Formula One will step in to try and resolve the situation and create a regulation change to slow them down. That's happened in the past to Mercedes and even to Red Bull back in the Vettel domination era, where they tried some things to, well, even out the competitive order, and Red Bull don't want to win every race by a minute because that's going to strengthen voices for that to happen. But also, they don't necessarily want to just win by a minute anyway, because if a safety car comes out and you've been banging in quick lap after quick lap and destroying your tyres, then you find yourself in a bit of a predicament potentially. So Verstappen kind of denies that they're sandbagging in part, kind of by saying that, well, they're doing some tyre management because there's no point winning by more than you have to, just in case there's a late safety car or red flag or circumstance where you need some extra rubber without needing to push it to the limit. But he does basically admit they had more pace in the tank here. So his full comment is, I think anyway, there's nothing they can really do when asked if, the FIA will be able to put rules into place to hinder their progression. So Verstappen is confident that there's no rule changes they can really make to slow down Red Bull. There is the argument going around that because these cars can't follow as easily as they did last year because the floor is less effective with the raised height of the floor, so there's more other features on the car that make them more difficult to follow than last year's cars, for example. There is an argument to say maybe they'll try and resolve that and also do it in such a way that hurts Red Bull more than the other teams, but Verstappen is confident that there's nothing that they're really going to be able to do to slow Red Bull down, and saying, we just do the best we can with the development of the car, but it's also about pace management, because we didn't really know, I think nobody knew, how long that hard tyre would last. So it's just about bringing it home because we had a bit of pace, I think, over the others, a bit of pace, he says, and there's no need to try and gain half a second a lap and destroy your tyres to the end, because you never know, safety car, red flags like we had today, not necessary to risk it. So I think a fair response from Verstappen saying, look, there's no need, if I'm much faster, to push the tyres, because I'm only putting myself at a potential disadvantage if a safety car comes out, and I need that extra rubber to the end of the race. But then again, if he'd have extended a 25-second advantage, they could just pit for new softs if a safety car comes out, for example. But it's interesting he mentions the gain half a second a lap kind of statistic, because it almost implies that if he wanted to, if he actually pushed a little bit harder, because, Hamilton and Alonso ended the race on, well, they would have done, I think, if the race had ended with pretty much 0 tyres left. Like, they were managing to the ends, but they were trying to ensure that they ended with as little rubber as possible left in those tyres, because, they want to push them to the absolute limit to try and get the best position possible. Whereas Verstappen would have finished with a lot more rubber, I think, on the car, and probably thinks that if he'd have pushed the tyres as hard as those behind him were pushing them, he could have had another half a second a lap probably, which does put him up to the 0.7 of a second-ish advantage range that Russell was discussing, because the advantage on average compared to Red Bull and Mercedes was 2 to 3 tenths. But, when you look at the actual context of the Grand Prix, there was a lot more in the tank for Red Bull, and if there is another half a second, we're talking 7-8 tenths like Russell is suggesting, which of course is a pretty mega number, especially if that's going to be maintained over many Grand Prix weekends, because so far this track didn't really suit them. It's been a terrible track for Red Bull in their history, and yet they dominated, at least in terms of pure pace. And next up we go to Baku, which is lots of straight lines there, and that could be rather good for them as well. Horner even responded with, I thought, a quite nice comment. Horner loves being smug when he's winning. This guy, you can't wipe the smile off his face, but as he says, that's very generous of him. He would know all too well from his team about those kind of advantages, right? So looking back on the level of advantage that Mercedes had, certainly in the early days, 2014, 15, 16, when they were literally turning down their engine to not look as good as they could, so that they wouldn't, so the regulations wouldn't change, because it was a very early one-stop race. Of course, there was tyre management going on. So the Red Bull guys are saying, no, it was just tyre management, guys. We're not sandbagging. But when you add up the numbers, you probably think, all right, they do have a fair bit in the tank here, and it's going to be difficult for them to catch up, right? I thought this is an interesting analysis here from Giuliano De Kester, suggesting that they're able to gain about 10% advantage in lap time, whereas Mercedes fry maybe like 8%, something in that ballpark. So yeah, significantly more powerful for the Red Bull right now. Their aerodynamics are absolutely on point. A couple of other stories to mention for you guys to close out the video here. Toto Wolff suggested, with Mick Schumacher now at Mercedes as their reserve driver, that the way Haas treated Mick Schumacher, the way he was ousted from the team, and the way that, Steiner was obviously talking down on Schumacher, and look, don't get me wrong, bringing in Hülkenberg has been the correct call for them. I think there's no doubt about it with the way he's performing so far this season. But Wolff did make an interesting statement to say that Haas wouldn't have have dared treat Mick Schumacher the same way if Michael was, trackside unable to keep up with his progress in the way that we wish that he would be able to. But I thought a rather spicy take actually there from Toto Wolff, and even Fred Vasseur comments on the FIA and says, I thought it was a fair point as well, this one though, they took 30 laps to decide if Alonso was in the box or not back in Saudi Arabia, and with Sainz's penalty, it took them 5 seconds to confirm. So definitely inconsistencies, and you can understand the frustration from that perspective. But very much enjoyed your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Just one final funky stat for you guys to close out the video. All the podiums we've seen so far this season have come with drivers whose numbers only include the digits 1 or 4. So far we've had either Verstappen, Perez, Alonso and Hamilton, and of course Verstappen's number 1, Perez is 11, Alonso is 14, Hamilton is 44. So pretty interesting kind of coincidence, I suppose. And I guess Lando Norris will look at this and be rather optimistic about his potential this season as well. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.